Disneyland for a few days of fun, and then returned this past Friday. I then checked the voicemails and emails. I was asked, begged, and then ordered to come to the HR for important meetings. It is very important that we speak to you as soon as possible, is what they said repeatedly. So yesterday, I went into the district's office wearing cargo shorts, a shirt I got at Disneyland, and flip-flops. I don't work there, so I don't need to dress up. When I arrived, I was originally treated like a visiting VIP. The HR manager and her assistant tried to butter me up like a Pillsbury biscuit. After a few minutes of them trying to make small talk, and me then letting them know I had plans to go to lunch in 30 minutes, they got to the point. They wanted me to turn over a few things that I took with me. That, though they belonged to me, they said was sorely needed at the school. They gave me a list from the new principal, which included, but was not limited to, my chair, seriously, my refrigerator and appliances, my community contacts board, the people and businesses that I built relationships and partners with that I destroyed, my personally designed forms and worksheets, the two-way mirror, my lockdown buckets and fire drill bags. They also wanted copies of every record I kept and notes I took on the staff and students. The notes that I took on the staff was so I could personalize gifts for them and have conversations with them on their interests. I said no to all those requests. I told the ladies that the furniture and appliances were mine that I brought in. I stated that the chair was a gift to me from a friend and that the new principal can afford to buy her own chair. I also stated that I left any official school and district documents there, and any I took with me and or deleted were of my own making and therefore my intellectual property. I also stated that my contacts were developed over the years on my personal time and at a personal cost to me. I also stated that everything I took that I'd submitted reimbursement was never reimbursed. I kept my records and pay stubs. I never saw a red cent from those submissions. They offered to pay me for some of the items and gave me a rough figure of what the district would pay me to return the fridge, the forms, buckets, bags, mirror, and contact board. I told them that I did not want to hand them over to the new admin team since they treated me so poorly. They asked me again and tried to reason that some of those things could be interpreted as school property. I told them that they were welcome to try and force me to return anything that was legally mine to them, but I'd be willing to fight it in court. I also told them that those two new administrators made me feel uncomfortable and that their treatment of me could be considered making a hostile work environment, especially when they tried to make me do their jobs for them. I then gave the HR team my lawyer's info. Finally, I wished the lady a good school year in the term to come and left. I doubt I'll ever hear from them again. And there we go, brilliant story. The best thing about this was you literally did exactly what you were asked the entire way through. Of course, you knew what you were doing was going to be extremely annoying to the management team and they hadn't really realized the full extent of what exactly they were asking, but you weren't going outside the rules. You were literally doing as asked, and fair play to you. To me, this feels like it might even be r/unfinished revenge. Not a subreddit that I know of, but surely when the kids and everyone comes back to term, the next school year, they're going to fully realize what has happened here and what's really gone wrong and how important you were to this institution along with all of your personal belongings that they didn't realize were your personal belongings. It's just pretty incompetent from HR and the new management and all. I mean, asking you to give all your personal stuff without really knowing what that is ridiculous. Ordering you to come into meetings with HR when you're not even employed anymore is illegal. And on top of all of that, asking you to reapply to a job that they just fired you from is crazy. The best part of this story, by a mile in my opinion, is the moment where you unscrew the bolts that you personally bought to fix a desk, leaving it obviously broken. I mean, that is elite, I've got to say. The tale of the Brazilian Punisher. Francisco Vital da Silva was born in the backlands of Bahia, and like many Northeasterners, migrated to Sao Paulo in search of better living conditions. Together with his family, he went to live in Itam Paulista, in the violent east side of Sao Paulo. Working as a bricklayer, Vital set up a bar. The establishment, though, was constantly robbed and vandalized by criminals. Tired of that extortion, Chico began to retaliate against abuse and put undesirable people out of his business. Always armed with a knife for self-protection, he ended up arousing the rage of many dangerous guys. One day, they broke into his house and R-worded his wife and 16-year-old daughter. Chico, disgusted with these criminals, bought some weapons and went after revenge. He ended up killing those guys and left a very clear message: if the police don't act, I'll take action. Thus, Francisco Vital da Silva, a merchant from Bahia, became Chico de Pato, a vigilante who hunted outlaws in the eastern region of Greater Sao Paulo. Chico's fame grew considerably. The police gave him the names of criminals wanted by justice, and he executed them and began to be seen by the population as a great hero, a vigilante who replaced the terrible justice that the state always put on the poorer classes. In the mid-1980s, the police were ordered to kill criminals in the outskirts of the city. Chico did much of the work. He was even called on by the population more than the ROTA battalion itself. Pedro Pato's fame grew so much that the famous newspaper Noticias Populares made a series of reports to talk about his efforts against criminals, which got the admiration of people from all over the state of Sao Paulo, in addition to also gaining popularity and appearing in the stories of broadcaster Afanasio Jazidi, a kind of detainer of the 80s. Chico's fate would change after an argument in a bar, when, while drawing his gun to retaliate, he killed a plainclothes military policeman. Upon learning that the victim was a police officer, Pedro Pato already knew that he would not have much time to live, as he already knew the law of the streets. You cannot kill a police officer and go unpunished. Shortly after the crime, Chico fled in his Opala and was considered wanted by the military police. The ROTA was responsible for hunting the vigilante, who, upon contacting Afanasio Jazadi, managed to surrender himself to the DEIC. On the day of his arrest, more than 500 people were at the door of the police station asking for his release. A petition was made, but it was no use. Chico was tried and sentenced to 6 years in prison, a considerably short time for the amount of homicides he carried out. The low sentence was probably the result of pressure from the 2,000 people who were at the door of the forum on the day of the trial. Pedro Pato was transferred to a penitentiary, where, because he was hated by many criminals and the police, he was killed with 91 stab wounds. The police force was afraid that Pedro Pato would open his mouth about the punishments he committed doing in favor of the policeman. The bandits had a matter of honor to settle with, so, as expected, he didn't last long inside the prison system. So there we go, a pretty incredible story to start off today's episode. This is a true story. It did actually happen back in the 1980s, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. A vigilante taking criminal matters into his own hands because the police pretty much weren't capable. Let me know down below in the comments, what do you think of this man? Do you think he was in the right or the wrong? Because ultimately, he did kill over 50 people. Unlawfully, because obviously you can't do that. Yes, the police asked him to do it and encouraged him to do it, but it was still illegal, and that's why he went to prison. Let me know, do you think he was in the right for doing all that stuff, or in the wrong? You gotta remember what he went through himself, his own wife and daughter getting R-worded by criminals, and that is what set this entire thing off. So yeah, get down in the comments, I wanna hear your thoughts. Sometimes, I wonder what kind of person I'd be if I'd never been medicated at all. 6-year-old girl gets revenge on a bully. I'll be honest here, sometimes I think about the time I got revenge on my childhood bully. For context, I was still in the trial phase of searching for the right ADHD medication. I was 6 years old at the time of the story, and outside of my parents and my daycare and elementary teachers, no one else has heard this before. There was a girl who had just moved to the area and was only there while her dad was stationed at the army camp, base or whatever you want to call it. She was an aggressive, most likely angsty, angry teen who was tired of moving every 2 to 3 years. I see that now as an adult. I'm 22, so this was about 15-ish years ago. Anyways, I had to sit at the very front of the bus because I had a severe peanut allergy. This girl, we'll call her Kendra, partly for anonymity, partly because I can't remember her name now, had gotten into some serious trouble and was also forced to sit at the front with me for the next 2 weeks. Each day, she would take my backpack and throw it on the ground, stomping on it and getting it covered in mud before she'd shove me into the wall and sit on me. Keep in mind, she was a rather heavy-set 13-14-year-old, and I was a 6-year-old who weighed maybe 30 pounds soaking wet. I was incredibly tiny, thanks IBS, and she would use that to her advantage. We had folders called moose books, and she, on a few occasions, took my homework and notes out and ripped them up or crumpled them so that I couldn't write well on them, which led to me having to pull my card 2 times. One particular day, she saw that I'd just gotten a new pair of glasses, some really cool early naughty sunglasses. She took them off my face and snapped them in half before resuming her regularly scheduled crushing me against the window session. I was sobbing in pain and absolutely terrified. The bus was so loud I couldn't be heard over the noise. The next afternoon, I decided, well, maybe that's a strong word, to get revenge. I sucked bruises, like hickeys, into my own skin, on my arms mainly. I also bit myself hard enough to bruise for good measure. When I got off the bus at my after-school daycare, again after being hurt, but not like what I'd done to myself, my teacher freaked out. I told my teachers that my bully had been biting me and punching me, hence the bruises. They ended up calling my parents, who then called the school. My bully ended up having to change bus routes, and I also got in trouble, but only for lying. They reviewed the camera footage and saw everything but the part I'd lied about, obviously. The thing is though, I didn't feel remorse until I got into trouble myself. Only then did I feel bad. I feel like I could have handled it better, but hey, not bad for a 6-year-old, right? Sorry, no, you handled this literally perfectly, and the fact that you did this at 6 years old is stunning, genuinely. I don't think I would have been able to come up with such a good plan at that age. In fact, I know I would not have been able to. Now, some of you might be thinking there was no need to go to that extent of actually giving yourself bruises and biting yourself, and I agree, it's a little bit far, but realistically, you have to think about the context of this moment. Would the teachers and, maybe principal at this school have really believed a 6-year-old over a 13 to 14-year-old? Maybe. Potentially, but you don't necessarily know that. So this 6-year-old OP had to really sell it. And if you see bruises and bite marks on a 6-year-old kid, then at that point, you really are going to believe them. And that is what happened. Moral of the story, if you are getting bullied, and trust me on this one, you have to go and tell somebody. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have never really been bullied in school. I got quite lucky there. But for a brief period of time in elementary school, primary school in the UK, I was slightly bullied, I guess. But so was everyone else, to be fair. There was this one horrible kid in our primary school when we were about maybe 6 or 7 or 5 years old. He was just terrible to everyone. And I remember I told my dad, and my dad sorted it. And it was unbelievable. So there you go. Moral of the story is, if you are getting bullied, do actually tell somebody. Trust me, the consequences of telling someone, however bad they may feel or seem in your head, are way better than continuing to get bullied. Trust me on that one. Dealing with an entitled neighbor. Just flipping through a few stories and reading about entitled drivers getting their just desserts. This made me think back to my days as a paramedic. We got a call to our house where there was a bariatric patient who had fallen. The patient was morbidly obese and weighed around 30 stone, 420 pounds. This story isn't really about them though. There are many reasons people get to this size, and I've never judged, only helped. But no, the problem here was a really arrogant neighbour that we'd come across before. And boy, was this chap a judgmental moron. Our patient had a car and had a disabled parking permit. They also had a council-designated disabled parking spot outside their home, which the neighbour kept parking in. There have been a number of letters from the council regarding this, and a number of parking fines just served to annoy this chap even more. On the day of the story, I took the call that the patient had fallen, and we went to the house. Sure enough, the neighbour was not only parked in the disabled spot, but had parked a second car blocking access to the patient's driveway. I assessed the patient and suspected they'd broken a hip, so I needed to go in. I sent my colleague round to the neighbour to ask them to move the cars, and when they came back, I was told the neighbour had just told my colleague to do one. No problem, time to get the message home. I radioed through to our control centre and asked for the fire service and police. We needed the fire service to help lift the guy, and the police to do a little parking control. The fire service were the first to arrive, and I spoke to the crew commander to let them know what the situation was. A fireman went to the house to ask the neighbour to move the car again, and was told the same as my colleague. The message was relayed back, and the watch commander just asked me one question. Is the patient's life at risk? I knew exactly where this was going, and it was time our thoughtless neighbour got the message. My answer was, yes. There is equipment I need to get into the house, and the driveway is blocked, preventing me from doing so. The watch commander told the fire truck driver to move those vehicles. It was really satisfying to see both vehicles being pushed down the road by the fire service, and the look on the neighbour's face as he came out spitting and screaming was well worth seeing. His complaints to the police fell on deaf ears. They were well aware of his history of obstruction, and my clinical assessment that the patient's life was in danger was more than enough justification for the vehicles to be moved. I doubt it made our patient's life any easier, and sadly they died a few months later without leaving hospital, but it really did bring a smile to their face as we wheeled them out. Honestly, what sort of person do you have to be to first of all say no to a paramedic when they're asking you to move their car? Then, on top of that, say no to a firefighter demanding the exact same thing. I'm sorry, first of all, that should be illegal. Second of all, this was completely justified. And third of all, the neighbor should have died and not this unfortunate man. I'm sorry, but this guy's an absolute disgrace and he deserved way more than just his cars getting moved. Now, this next story of revenge is quite possibly the most embarrassing I've ever read. Snobby cheater humiliated. So in college, there was a snobby guy named Joey who thought very highly of himself just because he had rich parents. He was the type of guy who broke up with a girl just because he found out she lived in a middle-class neighborhood and didn't wear the right name brands. In fact, he was so stuck up, he thought he could juggle 3 girls at the same time and not get caught. Well, he got caught. All 3 girls learned what he was doing and conspired to get him back. There was this big Halloween party at a sorority house, and they had a stupid tradition called a cock walk, where lots of guys volunteered to get placed inside what were basically plexiglass cages, plexiglass boxes just big enough for one person to stand in, and get put on display for the party guests to look at and vote up or down. The winning guy with the most upvotes got a free phone. So one of the 3 girls, who Joey cheated on, convinced him he had a very, very good chance of winning the cock walk, and she told him how popular he was with the ladies and how everyone was hoping he would compete so they could vote him up. Joey was so convinced he had a great shot at winning the cock walk, so he signed up. He even came dressed in a toga costume that he'd spent like $1,000 on, custom made for him. You should have seen him at the party with his nose in the air, thinking he was just the greatest thing ever. Well, what he didn't know is that the 3 girls he was juggling had somehow managed to get word out to almost everyone at the party about Joey and his snobby ways, and his womanizing. So when it came time for the cock walk, he was locked inside one of the plexiglass cases, and all the female guests lined up to walk past and vote up or down. Imagine Joey's surprise when the first 3 girls in line were the 3 girls he was cheating on. Of course, all 3 girls voted him down. That was probably humiliating enough. But then he had to stand there, locked behind the glass, and watch every girl at the party vote him down too. Girl after girl filed past him, including cheerleaders and sorority sisters, and all the girls guys like to impress. And they all cast their downvotes. Many of them were making faces and gestures at him, and laughing. Joey turned so bright red. He tried to get out of the box, but the door, which was behind him, was locked, so he tried to bump his butt against the door over and over to jar it open, but from the front, that only made it look like he was humping up against the glass or something. He was making himself...
We build Michigan. We believe in competition, opportunity, and the free market.
Welcome, friends, to another r/malicious compliance video. Today we've got a great story of compliance of sticking it to a company that fired you and then still wanted your help. But first, a story from Lumberlady72415, store policy. This was years ago. I'm talking 2004, 2005. I'm not complaining here, simply pointing out an event I personally found funny. We had a new manager take over our grocery store that I worked at. He wanted us to follow the policy book to the letter, and I mean to the letter. A tad bit unrealistic, but he was super polite about it and said he was just trying to protect everyone's jobs. I thought this was nice of him, but at the same time, several of us tried to point out that some of the policies needed revision. One of the things in the policy book was we were to card everyone who wanted cigarettes or alcohol. It didn't matter if it was extremely obvious that they are of age. It said in the policy book to card everyone, including any people with the person paying. If there were little kids, then this was of course an exception, they can't possibly have ID, so all the employees started complying with this policy. There were grumbles by customers, but we were just doing our job. The customers seemed to understand, but would let the manager know how ridiculous they felt the policy was when it was extremely obvious as to who was old enough to purchase tobacco and alcohol without needing to card. But policy was policy after all. Well, one day I was working and I had a woman come into my line with a couple bottles of wine. And who was with her? The store manager off the clock. It was him and his wife. Now let's remember, store policy is to card everyone, no exceptions aside from little kids. So what do? I ask for both of them to provide ID. My boss looks at me and says, "Isn't it obvious we're of age?" I'm your boss as well. Certainly you don't need to card us. I smiled and kindly reminded him what the store policy was and pointed out that it was in the policy book that cashiers are required to card everyone, no matter if they're obviously of age. I also reminded him how he told all the employees this was to be strictly enforced to protect our jobs. He just stared at me blankly. It's like he can't believe I'm following exactly what he said to do. His wife had already handed me her ID and looks at him and says, "Well, where's your ID? If it's store policy, then it's store policy." It wasn't long after that he contacted corporate to ask that the policy be revised. A few weeks later, we're handed a new policy book, and the new policy on cigarette and alcohol sales was to card if the purchaser looked under 40 years of age. Again, I'm not complaining here. I just thought the situation was funny. Does anybody else think even the revised policy seems a little iffy? I just feel like the average 40-year-old looks more than clearly old enough to purchase that kind of stuff. I guess it's just about covering their butts, but I still feel like that's a really high threshold. Like if you see somebody and they clearly look like 35, 30, well, you better break that ID out. What do you guys think? Is the sentence, if the purchaser looked under 40 years of age, still too high of an age in your mind to really make any kind of difference? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Our next story is from Lil Sour M. You need it now? Okay, man. This happened about a week ago. I'm usually a bartender, but I was serving tables at my job. While it's not my favorite thing to do, I try to give it my best attitude and it's not too bad. I was standing at our soda station filling up an empty pitcher with water and ice. Just as I had dumped the ice and begun filling the water, a newer server came up to me. New to us, not new to the industry. He says, "Hey, I need that pitcher." I have the section that's furthest away from the soda station, so I really don't want to wait for him and get behind. So I told him that I also need the pitcher. His response? "Well, I need it first." Me, at this point holding back a smile at how childishly amusing this is going to become, says, "Oh, well, I had it first." He replies, "I got it out first earlier, and I need it now." At this point, the pitcher is finally full of water. I pause for a second before grabbing the handle of the pitcher and telling him, "Okay, you can have it." I proceeded to dump the entire contents of the pitcher and handed it to him, smiling brightly. The look on his face and the half words he sputtered out were hysterical. I dashed into the kitchen to grab a pitcher and filled it up in there before I came back out to pick up 2 glasses of water I had filled before the pitcher and left out there. The server was still there and he says, "Hey, you forgot your water." When I go to grab one of the glasses, he puts his hand out at just the right time, so I tip the glass and most of the water and ice spills out. He didn't do this meanly and started preparing me a fresh glass of water to make up for it. I didn't take it. I smiled and looked him in the eyes as I topped off my glass with his pitcher, grabbed my full pitcher, glasses, and a tray, and whisked away laughing. Him and I are totally fine. We do joke around a bit, though I'm not sure why he thought basically ordering me to give it to him was going to end up in his favor. I'd just gotten pissed off at a table for telling me I needed to learn something to get better tips as a bartender. I needed to learn how to tie a cherry stem in a knot. Ew. So I could have been pissed enough to just take the darn pitcher initially. This was my first malicious compliance. Yay. I think honestly the most annoying thing in this situation is it seems like it wasn't that crazy for OP to just go and get themselves another pitcher. So why was this guy who was complaining so much, being a child, not able to just go grab another pitcher and deal with it? I mean, it worked out and it was playful, but it definitely was childish on their part. By the way, if you're enjoying these stories,
This fall in Ohio, there are so many ways to be moved. By horseback,
make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons down below so you never miss any of my daily videos. Our next story is from Gear Guy 123. I know your limitations better than you. For context, I was in the military at the time, and the story comes from my time sailing. I was freshly enlisted and posted to my first ship for my first sail. I was ecstatic. It was exciting for me to finally get a chance to see the world. Unfortunately, due to COVID restrictions at the time, we weren't able to go out on the town on the ports we came into. This was before the vaccine. While sailing, I took 2 nasty blows to the head. The second one threw me to the ground and caused me to black out briefly, and I woke up seeing double. I went to the dock on the ship, where I found out that I had a concussion. The doc wrote me medical restrictions: can't lift, can't work out, no going on unstable platforms. That included the upper decks because you can fall off the ship, etc. Now, for clarification, if you have a medical limitation, you can refuse to do certain work, as going against it is a chargeable offense because you are under orders by the doc. My boss, let's call him Jim, did not like this. He's the type of guy that thinks, I'm the boss and you have to listen to me and everything I say. He was not well liked. One day, he told me to go to the upper decks to help with the layout. I told him no, my medical says, and he goes ballistic. He says, just do what I say and don't give me any back talk. I say, okay, and I go up. It took me longer to get up there. Shocker, I'm concussed. When I get there, my buddy looks at me and panics. He knows that I shouldn't be there, and he's worried that I'm concussed and just wandering around. He quickly tells me that I shouldn't be there, and I just say, Jim said to. He said that I should have said no, and I go, I tried. He grunts and walks me back inside. Later, I get called to his office and he berates me, telling me how I'm useless, the worst sailor in the fleet, and how dare you say no to a gosh darn chief. He then asked me, why can't you go to the upper decks? And again, I tried to tell him my medical said I couldn't. But as usual, he cuts me off and goes, that's not written in. I know your limitations better than you. He then dismissed me and sits there all smug. I had enough of his BS, and I walked back to the dock and asked him to write word for word every upper deck I couldn't go to. He said, doesn't unstable platforms count as that? I replied that he needed it written, to which the doc said, do I need to write someone needs to hold your hand in the bathroom too? I like him. To which I laughed and said, no, that should be fine. When he handed me it, I photocopied it and put it on Jim's desk when he was on his break, and didn't say a word. I didn't see him much after, and he refused to talk to me for a week and passed orders to us on sticky notes for the rest of the sale. I'm guessing that he realized he opened himself up to some serious liability, and honestly, I'm just glad that they were a little bit more cautious going forward after it finally registered with them what OP was trying to say. I mean, let's be real, the one that was acting concussed here was the one trying to give orders and not listen to their people. Our next story is from Saucer. We want you to document everything. We, my coworker Joe and I, were in our senior year of college, so 20 or 21 years old, when a new director of our IT department decided to audit our tickets. When he did, he found an alarming lack of documentation. To his credit, the vast majority of our tickets were closed with antivirus was uninstalled, reinstalled it, or drivers were out of date. Updated them, descriptions matching the effort earned when you paid student workers $5.15 an hour. Really, that was the precedent that had been set when I started there my freshman year. An email went out demanding more documentation before we closed any incidents. It was a fair request, to be honest, so we began to add more information. Instead of speakers weren't plugged in, we would put, went to Professor so-and-so's office to troubleshoot the malfunctioning speakers, and noticed the speaker power light wasn't on. While the power adapter was actually plugged into the wall, the other end of the power cord was not plugged into the speakers. Plugged it in. A few days later, a second email went out. We appreciate the additional information, but we really need everything documented, including times you worked on, the buildings you went to, etc. Everything? Okay. Joe and I began documenting all of our tickets as if we were in a fantasy epic. For example, an owl was dispatched on the morn of the 18th day in September to our barracks. It was cold this day. A chill had settled across the land. 2 magic 17-inch Dell Optiplex viewer portals in the land of Violet Hall had died, and no amount of magic or medicine could restore them to life. At 9:24 on that morn, Sir Joseph Smithington and I, Lord Saucer of Reddit, began our trek across the barren wasteland with a carriage containing 2 new magic portals. It was a perilous journey. The sage wizard Professor Beck granted us access to the Violet, and the 2 portals were replaced. Sir Joseph and I have brought the stricken portals back to the safety of the hardware department and will begin rescue efforts at once. We believe the hard drives may be bad and will begin the RMA process back to their divine creator if necessary. We had a lot of fun for roughly a week ago until during a presentation with other bigwigs, the director pulled up one of our epics randomly. While other members in the meeting found it hilarious, I'm told the director felt
At Aspen Dental, get replacement dentures starting at $2.99 per arch. Schedule your free consultation.
humiliated. We were chastised quite a bit by the director, and our immediate boss, who is absolutely incredible, begged us to cool it so we didn't have to hear the director complain about it anymore. I mean, let's be real, although all of them are saying cool it, tone it down, that's not necessary, I think having these kinds of tickets and notes add a certain spice to the work. Or like, God forbid, if you've got to review these things, at least you're having a little bit of fun doing it. Still not worth it though for $5.15 an hour. And our final story of the day is from Queller Fiction, Fired in 2 weeks. I worked for 5 years as a federal contractor and eventually rose through the ranks, through blood, sweat, and tears, to a low-level supervisor. I managed a team of 13 working 2 federal contracts. Both contracts were new, and I was supposed to make them successful so the contracts would be renewed. This started right before COVID. Even before poop hit the fan, my second contract was going badly. The agency flooded us with work, and my boss repeatedly refused to ask them to slow it down. That was literally his only job. As a result, late work began piling up and costing the company lots of money. We did our best to keep up, which in reality meant a ton of unpaid overtime for me. Then COVID hit and things only got worse. My staff asked almost daily if there would be layoffs, and my boss's response to them was, "We don't know." To me, the answer was that my job was secure, but the others weren't. If the contract failed, he said, I'd have a place on another team. Obviously, the contract failed. My boss personally fired me and, unbeknownst to me, most of my team. I learned who was staying and who was going by talking with each of them personally. No one knew what was going to happen to them until it happened, and they were all shocked that I'd been fired as well. This was August 2020. Panic ensued. After firing me, my boss, who until that day I'd considered a very good friend, had the stones to call and ask me if I'd help him end the contract on a high note. I got fired 2 weeks before my official last day because that company's run by sadists. I told him I'd do my job. As a proud Slytherin, I immediately began doing everything I could, within the rules of course, to send my fired staff home in the best shape possible. We all knew our unused PTO would cash out, but sick time wouldn't. Everyone was sick those last 2 weeks, and my boss ended up doing most of the work himself. I also sent a ton of people to work from home with COVID-like symptoms so they could use their time to interview for jobs, etc. I was immediately hired by another federal contractor, and I brought my best former employee along with me. Since then, she and I poached about a dozen employees away from our former employer, who eventually threatened to sue her if she headhunted anyone else. I'm proud to say that our revenge-fueled efforts have taken so many of their good employees that the company is now openly failing and will soon go out of business. I mean, I think this is just kind of how the business world works. If you're not good at what you do, you're probably going to fail, and the other people that are not failing are either going to crush you into the dirt or buy you out. One thing I know is OP seems like a great person to work for. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another awesome compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out the video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.
We build Michigan. We believe in competition, opportunity, and the free market.
I found a $650,000 treasure when I was a kid. So I've never told anyone this outside my wife, but it's been a few years now, so here goes. When I was 12, I found a bag containing rare coins worth over $650,000. This was 96, 97-ish in winter. After school, a lot of the neighborhood kids would meet at a nearby pond to play pond hockey. For me, the easiest way to get there was to cut through the parking lot of some businesses at the edge of town through a half-mile or so path in the woods. One day, I'm walking down and I see a black leather bag laying next to a tree. It was kind of frozen, so I put it in my duffel
duffel bag and brought it with me. When I got home, I opened it and saw a pair of motorcycle boots and 2 airline tickets. I thought the motorcycle boots were so cool. I was a WWF fan at the time, and they were like the boots Shawn Michaels wore. They were too big for me, but I definitely saved them for when I was old enough to ride a motorcycle or wrestle. With the airline tickets, I thought I was rich. They're expensive, right? I took them to school and told everyone I was now rich. A teacher let me know they were actually boarding passes from earlier travel that's worthless. Oh well. I forgot about the bag and boots after that, and they literally sat in my closet for 20 plus years until my parents decided to move to a smaller house. They asked me to come by and clean out my former closets. There were lots of books, baseball cards, and trinkets from childhood to go through. I came across the black bag, which I hadn't thought about in decades. I took out the boots and noticed the bottom of the bag had a zipper. I opened it. There were some empty sheets of legal pad paper crumpled up. Below them was a plastic sleeve with 6 gold and silver coins, 4 US and 2 Canadian. I quickly googled these and saw crazy prices ranging from a couple of $1,000s to over $1 million. I didn't tell anyone as I figured that they were fakes, but I brought them with me on my next trip to New York City and went to a few coin hobby shops. I was getting offers of $5,000 to $15,000 for the set, but the last guy I went to said 2 of the coins in particular were ultra valuable and could go for much higher at auction. So that's what I did. The auction wasn't until a year later and ended up being virtual due to COVID, but altogether I received $646,000. After fees, that meant $525K, but obviously I had to pay taxes on this as well. I hadn't told my wife because I wanted to surprise her, and she was shocked when FedEx showed up the next day with a check for $500,000. I never told anyone because I was afraid someone would say that the coins belonged to them, but it's now been 25 years, so I figure I'm good. Alright, first of all, you are one lucky geezer. That is nuts. $650K from something you just happened to find and come across. How lucky are you? Secondly, I'm not entirely sure where I stand on this from a moral perspective, given that the things weren't yours and it did seem like you stole the bag, but it has been 25 years, as you say, so I guess it's okay? I think the truth is, though, and you know this yourself, as you said at the end of your post, if the original holder and owner of these coins came along and found you, like, that would still be their money, right? Their property. Surely, I don't know. Let me know how you feel about this in the comments down below. My wife went out last night and didn't come home until this morning. This is horrible. I'm furious right now, but I'm also depressed as hell. I know what I have to do, it's just killing me that I have to do it. It's fresh and it hurts a lot. My wife didn't come home last night. She went out with a couple of girlfriends, which is pretty normal for her. She's normally back around 2 AM on these nights, so I waited up. Around 2:30, I called to check in. She answered and I could hear people in the background. She told me they went to a party but were leaving in a couple of minutes. She wasn't home by 3 though, so I texted. It delivered but no reply. Around 4 AM I called again. It rang a couple of times before she sent me to voicemail. My wife finally came stumbling through the door at 6:47 AM this morning. I know the exact time because I was worried. She was wearing a dress she didn't leave the house in, with mesh leggings I've never seen either. The leggings had clearly been torn and her makeup was smudged. My heart sank when I saw her. My immediate worry was that she'd been assaulted. She only shook her head no when I asked her that. I asked her what she'd been doing then. She only said that I knew what she'd been doing, and that kind of confirmed what the voice in the back of my head had been screaming since she walked in. My wife cheated on me last night. I asked her who it was. She shrugged almost casually and said it was somebody they met at the club. She went back to his house and hooked up with him, then Ubered home. She then said she didn't want to fight and just wanted to sleep, so that's what she did. She's still asleep now and didn't even take a shower before passing out. Suffice to say, our relationship is over. We don't have any kids and we rent, so it shouldn't be an extremely complicated process. I keep trying to reason myself out of it, pretending there might be something to salvage here. I've always maintained that cheating would be a red line for me though. I think I need to stick to that now. And then just a couple of days later, we got the following update from OP. Me again, folks. I'm sorry I didn't get around to this sooner. I wasn't able to get the day off work yesterday because my boss kind of sucks. I was a complete mess at work though, so I was allowed to take the rest of the week as vacation, thankfully. I think I went through all the stages of grief while my soon-to-be ex was sleeping. I wasn't expecting my post to get any attention at all. I just figured I needed to try to talk to someone about it because I was not in a good headspace. I made the post in the morning, and by noon, she was still conked out in the bedroom. I'd processed things a bit more, and I had a rough plan in my head that I was starting to set in motion. I made a short list of questions I wanted answers to, gathered up all my important documents, laptop, etc. Then I went into the bedroom and started packing myself a suitcase. I know a lot of folks on Reddit wanted me to kick her out, and I did consider it, but honestly, I'm not overly attached to this place. We just rent, and I'm in a lucky enough situation to be able to say that paying half the rent for a few months isn't going to financially end me. Yeah, it will sting a bit, I won't lie, but I'll make it, and I feel like being around this place is only going to remind me of her anyway. I need to be looking forward, not back. She ended up waking about halfway through me packing my suitcase. There was a momentary confusion as she looked around the room, then she just started bawling. Maybe this is awful of me, but I didn't bother comforting her. I told her I had the screenshots of her Uber and text messages from her phone, and that plus her confirmation was enough that things between us were completely done. She didn't answer me and just cried louder. I debated trying to continue the conversation, but I decided to just pack the rest of my suitcase and head back out to the living room until she came out. When she finally left the bedroom, she sat next to me on the couch and asked me if we could talk things through. I told her as calmly as possible that wasn't how things were going to work. I was going to ask questions and I wanted honest answers. She told me she'd be honest, so I proceeded. My voice was shaking the entire time. It was taking me everything to hold it together, but I kept going. Was this the first time she cheated? She started crying before she answered that, then told me no. She cheated on me multiple times over the course of our relationship. It was, and I'm going to use her words exactly here, just sex, a way for me to let off steam. None of it ever meant anything. I wrote a comment shortly after making my post that all the love couldn't just fade away in one swoop. Well, it can. It hit me right then that I wasn't dealing with my wife. The person I was married to literally wasn't in the room. This was someone different. She refused to tell me exactly how many times she cheated, just more than last night. Next question, had she used protection? No hesitation from her before she nodded her head emphatically. She seemed surprised I'd even asked that. I'm still going to get tested just to be safe. I did some research into timing and I'm going to look after it. Were her friends also cheating on their spouses? Yes and no. I tried to get her to tell me which of her friends were cheating so I could get in contact with their spouses. She probably should have told me, because her refusal led to me messaging pretty much the romantic partner of every one of her girlfriends I could find on social media. There are a couple I don't know or couldn't find, but I did my parts. And finally, why did she do it? This was the answer that gutted me the most. I'm going to use her exact words again. I need to have sexual variety. I told her that it's not like our sex life is dull, but she clarified, it's not the same as something new. I didn't even have a response to that one. I'd expected something about me working too much or not supporting her emotionally. Nope, she just screwed other guys because she felt like it and wanted to have some fun. When I didn't respond, she started asking me about counseling and therapy. I reiterated that our relationship was over. I'd be leaving. What she did next disgusted me. My ex actually tried to have sex with me. She put her hands on me and started trying to take off my clothes. I felt like I wanted to vomit and pushed her away after a couple of seconds. She just kept telling me that she would figure out a way to fix it, that we'd work through it together. I told her there was no way and she started bawling again. She went to the bathroom and locked herself inside. I was just sick of everything at that point. I called her mother and told her what was going on. The full story too. The cheating, the questions I'd asked, and the fact I was leaving. I've always had a good relationship with my ex's parents. They both decided to drive to town, which is about an hour for them. Once I knew someone was on the way, I just grabbed my things and left. Her waterworks in the bathroom were just annoying me because it felt hollow to me, especially given the answers to my questions. I ended up packing another bag before I left and took all the things that I could think of that I felt sentimental attachment to with me. I found a parking lot and sat in my car until I was able to get in contact with a buddy for a place to crash. I tried to take a nap, but I was running on way too much adrenaline. I knew when her parents had made it to the apartment because she started calling me. When I didn't answer those, she started texting. She'd gone from sad and crying to furious. Apparently I'm a freaking POS for telling her mum everything. Whoops, I'm not sorry. I've received roughly 100 texts from her since leaving. They range from name calling all the way to begging me to come back to sending me pictures of the food she ate for some reason. I haven't responded to any of them. I feel like I said my piece before leaving. So that's where I'm at now. We didn't have joint finances, so that part was easy. I cancelled all the subscriptions that go to my credit card just to be sure, and changed all my important passwords. I'm crashing on my friend's couch for the next bit, but I've got some feelers out to sort some short-term rental places until I can find something more permanent. I've got feelers out for a divorce attorney too. A co-worker of mine had a recommendation, so barring something better, I'll probably go with them. I also wanted to say that I was shocked at how supportive everyone was on Reddit, and thank you for that. Truly, from the bottom of my heart. It isn't easy for me to talk about emotional things with people close to me, this was an invaluable venting place for me. Thank you all so much. And there we go, back down to earth with a sad story. I mean, look, at least the ending is somewhat positive, I guess, and it does again show the power of Reddit and how supportive it can be as a community, but wow, what a tough one. Like, the lack of remorse as well is the most brutal thing in this. When your wife was just like, you know what I did. How do you even take that? Good for you though, I will say, for getting out of there and not taking any more of this BS from your ex. It's crazy how only after she realizes that you are going for real does she actually show some emotion, because doing that, coming home at like 6 and then just saying, yeah, you know what I did, I'm going to sleep. Nuts. My husband saved my life and our son's life and doesn't know it. When I was about 24, my daughter was 5, and me and my husband got into it because of a disagreement about our daughter. My husband was going to take her to the park, but I said she has to read with me. She was just learning. Then she can go to the park. She was very upset, and my husband walked the dog while she read to me. She finished, and my husband was still walking the dog, and she was mad that I stopped her park session. I said, why don't we go? iPhones were just becoming big, and my husband and I had one, so I said we can text him and he can bring the dog too. And she said mummy was mean, and she only wanted to play with daddy, and it's more fun when mummy is home because mummy is mean. I don't remember the exact words, but they were something like that. I just told her I was sorry. I went upstairs into our bedroom, then I cried for a bit. I grabbed my antidepressants and poured the whole bottle into my hand. I have a picture of me, my husband, and our daughter on her first day of school, and I stopped and grabbed it and looked at it. I just stared at their faces for a while. I remember I was thinking about how happy they're gonna be when I'm gone. Mummy won't be around to be mean to everyone. Just her and daddy playing all day. Then my husband came upstairs and asked her, where's mummy? And then I heard him coming upstairs, and I put the pills back into the bottle and then went into bed to pretend I was napping. My husband asked if I wanted to go to the park with them. I said no, because our daughter says I'm mean and he's fun. He said, I guarantee if you go to the park and play with her, she'll forget all about that. She's 5. She probably doesn't even remember what we had for breakfast this morning. I said I was tired, and he told me he really wanted me to go. So I said, fine. I went to the park and we built sandcastles, and I pushed her on the swing, and I even swung with her. We went down the slides and everything. But I'll never forget this moment. We were swinging together and she said, I'm Supergirl. And I picked her up off and held her like she was flying and said, here comes Supergirl to the rescue, and she was laughing and giggling. Then we built sandcastles again and she said, I love you, mummy. I said, mummy loves you too, and gave her a nice smooch on the cheek. That is one of my favorite moments in life. My husband was right. I found out 3 days later I was pregnant. This was 5 years ago. If my husband didn't make me go to the park that day, I wouldn't be here, and neither would our son or our other kids. I'm a mother of 3 now, and I'm planning on asking my husband for a 4th. Nobody knows this story. Wow, there we go. What a way to end this episode. I mean, that is a close